Start out by saying I'm sorry to be a few minutes late. I had to pick up my son from a very important engagement, which was supposed to be done at 8 o'clock your time, and didn't finish till around 9:45 your time. And I have a couple lectures I want to give to you today. I thought I would have a little bit more time to prepare them, but let's see how it goes. And I want to uh, jump in. Let me make sure that I can get my PowerPoint up here. Let me
Okay,
see
thanks.
where it is. There we go. Um, I believe, of course, I've got more than one open, but I believe this is the one I would like to share with you. Yes, it is. Um, and what did Garrison Keillor say when he opened his show? It was another quiet week in America, my home country, right? A lot going on this week, almost incomprehensibly much. And so, although I do want to continue with my lecture series on race and justice in the United States in the beginning of the third decade of the 21st century, and to focus on law and the role that law has played in part in dismantling past systems of social inequality and hierarchy, also to explain and draw on some important contemporary scholarship on the role that law has played in shoring up racial hierarchy and inequality in the 20th and even 21st centuries. Before I do that, however, as I say, it's been a tremendous week, and so what I want to talk with you about today, I'm going to title somewhat grandiloquently, "The Week the Myth of Donald Trump Collapsed, and the hollowness of a kind of masculinity, American masculinity, was exposed." And I can't be 100% confident about this. Um, Trump has an enormous capacity, Donald Trump, for rescuing victory from defeat, from turning failure into success. Having said that all, this week has been so damaging to him. And I'm not just talking about politically. Obviously, the president of the United States, who is a human being, and we have to remember, of course, that our partisan differences notwithstanding, we are talking about a fellow citizen and a fellow human being has contracted a virus that can do terrible things to a person. Uh, let's hope that's not the case with him. I will talk more about that in a few minutes. I'm really talking, though, about the political effects of what's happened to Donald Trump this week, and so I'm going to unfold this week to you in the context of contemporary American politics, and I'll start out by noting to you that the polls have not been kind to Donald Trump, nor does the election look like it's going his way. And it's not just that his rating in the polls typically shows him trailing Joe Biden by at least 7 points, that his favorability has remained stubbornly negative, that the two issues that most Americans say they care most about, which are the coronavirus and the economy, he is not rated positively on, and that he is fighting an uphill battle in light of the fact that both of them have been disastrously mismanaged by his administration. It is also the case, as always, that American politics turns on the Electoral College, at least for the presidency, and that the Electoral College is determined by the states. And if you're comparing notes, you may notice that there are two more states in Joe Biden's column at the this Saturday compared with last Saturday. That would be North Carolina and Ohio. And the margins in North Carolina and Ohio are such that I don't think we should get excited about Joe Biden carrying them or necessarily what's going to happen in the senatorial campaigns. Though I think North Carolina, there's a good chance the Democrats may actually take that. But when we look at Pennsylvania, what we're seeing is a consistent, large, and widening lead for Joe Biden. And I didn't get a chance to integrate it into today's lecture, but the New York Times just generated new polls in Pennsylvania, Florida, and Arizona. And all of them show that Joe Biden is widening his lead, that the president's performance in the debates did not help him. And by the way, I believe we are at a moment right now where the polls are failing to keep up with the news, right? We're still trying to come to grips with how the debates are going to influence, or the debate that happened on Tuesday night is going to influence polling, let alone how the other revelations of the week are going to influence polling. The polls are a lagging indicator, and all indications seem to be that things are getting worse and not better for the president. And this is then reflected in the kind of dynamic, the trajectory of the polling data. And as you can see, based again on a model that looks at what's happening in the states, looks at what's happening with the economy, looks at what's happening with the pandemic and volatility in the electorate, what seems to be the case is that not only is Biden's lead stubbornly persistent, but that it is in fact growing, and growing to the point where it is the most substantial lead he's had since he's really become the official nominee of the party, or at least consolidated that position by securing enough votes to have the nomination, right? And so this is the context of everything that happened in the last week. What we see now, and again, if you're comparing with last week, if we limited our projections about the Electoral College to those states where Joe Biden's lead is in excess of the margin of error in the polls, we would have seen a Biden victory. If we gave all those states where Biden was in the lead to Joe Biden, we would have seen a Biden landslide. But last week, if the polls were off as far as they had been in 2016, and please note that I believe it's a professional hazard of pollsters that they overcorrect from their mistakes in the previous election. So in 2012, the polls actually underestimated Barack Obama's share of the vote. In 2016, they underestimated Donald Trump's share of the vote. They underestimated the likelihood that less educated voters would vote, and clearly Donald Trump brought them to the polls. They had some trouble reaching people who didn't have cell phones, and those people tended to break in the direction of Donald Trump. And they had trouble with undecided voters, who also broke more dramatically in the direction of Donald Trump. And so they've corrected for all of this year. And so the likelihood that the polls are off in the same way that they were in 2016, either to the same degree or in the same direction, I think is quite slender. But having said that, for the first time, looking at it this way, even if the polls were off in the same way, by the same degree, in the same direction, Joe Biden still wins a narrow victory in the Electoral College. And so that sets the context for what happened in this last week in American politics. And now I want to go through the events of the week. And in a sense, each one of these deserves an hour's worth of analysis. I'm certainly not going to be able to do them justice, but I do want to at least give a little bit of analysis. And so if we start exactly a week ago, last Saturday. The event of that day that dominated the news cycle was that Donald Trump officially nominated Judge Amy Coney Barrett to be his pick to succeed Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg to the Supreme Court. And of course, there was a major event at the White House. And that event was to announce and celebrate the nomination of Judge Barrett. It now turns out that it appears that probably around a dozen people, including the President of the United States and the First Lady, the chair of his campaign, one of his main or a couple of his main advisors, the chair of the Republican National Committee, and at least 2 US senators contracted coronavirus at that event. We can't say that with absolute certitude, but based on the timeline, it does look increasingly likely that that event, where of course people were gathered in close quarters without masks, right? Not obeying the CDC guidelines about social distancing or mask wearing, in part to contribute to a image, convey a sense that things are normal here, that this is a celebratory occasion, and at this occasion, we don't need to be thinking about the virus. The optics of masks and social distancing do not favor the president. And given his desperation, let me just say for a moment why that is, right? I hope it's obvious, but in a sense, anytime that the American people are thinking about the coronavirus, it is disadvantageous to Donald Trump. The polling data are very clear. Again, I'm sorry I wasn't able to get all the slides that I wanted to get in today, but by about 2/3 to 1/3, the American people disapprove of the president's handling of the coronavirus. And so anytime the people see him and associate him with the virus, it is a problem for him. The whole point of the nomination, the rushed nomination, and what we may still see, the rushed battle to confirm Judge Barrett, the whole point is, in a sense, to change the subject, right? To take Americans who are on the fence about Donald Trump from a place where they're thinking about the thing that really leads them to have reservations about him, the virus, to a place where they remember what leads them to support him, that he has done what he promised to do in remaking the federal bench to be a much more conservative institution and replacing the most liberal, the most activist of the judges with one of the most conservative justices to be on the court, as far as we can tell based on her record, would certainly cement that. But in order to then say to his constituencies, look at me, I'm doing what you elected me to do. And by the way, please don't think about the virus. He needed to have that event look like a normal event, not an event taking place in a pandemic. And so there was no social distancing. There was no mask wearing. And by the way, this didn't only occur outside in the Rose Garden where it's obviously less risky. It continued in the White House for select guests, and the guests were tested. The CDC will tell you that it's not sufficient to test someone to determine that they don't have the virus. They can have the virus, but not yet have an immunoresponse. They can have the virus and not yet be symptomatic. And as best we can tell, we can't tell for sure because we're still struggling to understand the virus, you can transmit the virus when you are asymptomatic and don't yet have an immunoresponse. And it may very well be that that is what happened last Saturday night. So that's the first thing that happened. And by the way, in my rush to put these slides together in a couple minutes, it looks to me like I've truncated the title, because it's supposed to have Act 2 up there as well. And Act 2 is that Trump's taxes were finally revealed, also Saturday night. And Trump's taxes revealed by the New York Times in a blockbuster story with incredible detail and analysis revealed a number of quite damning things. Among them, the fact that over the last decade, there have been many years in which Donald Trump has not paid taxes, that in his first 2 years as president of the United States, he paid $750 in taxes, federal income taxes per year, and that is almost certainly a made-up number, right? It's not as if somebody did a complex calculation and it just so happened to come out at 750 twice in a row. Right? The president of the United States relied on the fact that while he was president of the United States, the Internal Revenue Service was not going to audit his taxes and publicly announce that he had been engaging in accounting shenanigans to generate that figure. And as a result, he was cavalier with his taxes, as he was cavalier with regards to the virus on Saturday as well. And so we learned that not only that, but in the year in which Donald Trump actually was presented with a sizable tax bill, and that would be for 2005. And as you can see, that's the year in which his income from The Apprentice and from the licensing and endorsement agreements that came out of The Apprentice, that year he was presented with a tax bill in excess of $70 million. He paid it, but then he immediately amended his tax returns and demanded a refund, which he was granted, right? And so even in the year in which he was supposed to pay a tax bill perhaps commensurate with his earnings, right? And in that year, it appears that he may have earned in excess of $100 million. Tax bill was immediately fought against, and in fact, Donald Trump was granted a refund for basically the entirety of the bill, right? And so we have the president of the United States contributing less to the coffers of the country that he is running, not just while he's president, but in the previous almost 20 years, than does a school teacher or a firefighter or a secretary. You pick your employment category, then does almost everyone else in the country. And by the way, paying much less than his fellow billionaires pay, right? And by the way, there's some pretty good indication in all this that Donald Trump may in fact own $1 billion in assets, but that the way in which he has leveraged those assets may knock him out of the billionaire category, or at least may do so soon. Now, what else did we learn about Donald Trump from those taxes? Not only that he didn't pay his fair share of taxes, and I've lectured to you before recently about how the US tax code has been transformed in the last 75 years from being a genuinely progressive to being a deeply regressive tax code in which the wealthiest people in our society make the least contribution in taxes to sustaining the cost of civilization in our society, right? And so in a sense, that shouldn't be a terrible surprise, but the idea that instead of paying $1 million in taxes in a year in which he made $140 million or $14 million in taxes, 10% of his income, that he ultimately demanded all of his taxes back, that in subsequent years when he was still earning tens of millions of dollars, he was paying nothing in taxes, right? Not only did we learn that, but we learned that in the buildup to the period in which Donald Trump attained his reality TV stardom, uh, that he actually was in grave financial shape, that he was on the brink of financial collapse, and that in fact the deal that he got with The Apprentice bailed him out. And the dramatic success of a reality TV show compensated for substantial and growing losses in his core business, his real estate empire. And that when we add in the licensing and endorsements that resulted from the success of The Apprentice, almost all of the wealth that Trump has generated over the last 15 years comes out of the success of that television show and a couple core properties. But that in the end, Trump took the money that he made, reinvested it, and the businesses that he's reinvested it in are sinking, right? And so we also learned that in a sense that this is a repeating pattern, which is to say he inherited roughly $400 million from his father. By the time he got to the early 2000s, that investments that he had made with that money had deteriorated to the point where he was in deep economic trouble. He then got another in excess of $400 million in income. He reinvested it. And again, those investments have not panned out. And so to the extent that Donald Trump ran for the presidency, gained national attention, became a reality TV star on the basis of the idea that he had stellar business acumen. The tax records reveal a very different image of the man who is now the president of the United States. And when I titled this lecture, The Collapse of the Myth of Donald Trump, the right effort to myth make, to present an image in which we are not in the grips of a deep pandemic that is extraordinarily dangerous and requires extraordinary measures, may very well be the reason that Donald Trump has the coronavirus now. Let me say that more strongly. I think there's no doubt that the reason that the president of the United States has the coronavirus is because he has disregarded the public health directives around wearing masks, social distancing, avoiding large gatherings indoors. And he has done that because he wanted to project an image that suggested that something different from the truth actually was the case in the United States under his presidency. And similarly, it turns out that the gilded image that he presented on The Apprentice was masking a much more problematic reality. And that even when, in a sense, the success of that charade allowed Trump to settle some of the debts that were really dogging him in the first decade of this century, he repeated the mistakes of the past and did not show himself to be a savvy businessman, but in fact something quite the contrary. Now, one last gambit I think that is revealed by these documents that I think is in a sense less interesting, less significant, but nevertheless worth noting, is that it appears that in fact Donald Trump has lost a fair bit of money around his run for president of the United States and then becoming president of the United States. At this time, right, when Donald Trump is coming down the golden elevator and referring to Mexican Americans as rapists and criminals, he loses the Miss America beauty pageant, Miss Universe beauty pageant. He loses the syndication rights for The Apprentice. He loses much of his sponsorship deals. And so the way in which he gained the presidency which we look at Michael Cohen's account, other accounts, it appears that he saw this as, in essence, a branding opportunity, an opportunity to revive the Trump brand, may have in fact done the opposite. So that's Act Two. Act Three is the debate. It came fast and furious this week, right? So what to say about the debate? Clearly, Donald Trump had a strategy, and that strategy was to interrupt and bully to such a degree his opponent that either his opponent, who historically had a stutter, who has a reputation for malapropisms, for misspeaking, for becoming tongue-tied, who is in his late 70s and who may not be quite as sharp as he was a decade ago, right? That if he could knock him off his game through sheer aggression, that he would win the debate. And that even if he didn't succeed in producing a gaffe or a deer in the headlight moment from Joe Biden, the fact of his energy and aggression would cement the image that he was a capable leader and that Joe Biden did not have what was required to succeed as president, a kind of vitality, a kind of vigor, you might say a kind of virility, masculinity, right? And it was a sham. It was shameful. It was sad in terms of what it says about the health of American democracy. There was no real sustained discussion of policy. There was the spectacle of the President of the United States engaged in a unrelenting attack on the credibility of the electoral process in the United States, of the only process that we have for determining the will of the people and the outcomes of our fateful political choices, right? Undermining, in other words, the core institution of democracy in the United States, and not just in a one-off way, again and again and again, based almost exclusively on disinformation or flat out lies, right? And so in and of itself, when the President of the United States feels that he has the liberty and latitude to lie and bully, and that is the best strategy available to him to win an election, that is clearly an indication that something is amiss in our democracy. Now, I will pick my moment for being most revealing in that debate, and it actually isn't the moment that I think has got the most attention, when Donald Trump refused to condemn or disavow white supremacist organizations and seemed to give, as opposed to that, a wink and a nod to one of the more violent terrorist white supremacist organizations in the country. To my mind, in a sense, the most revealing moment of the debate was when Joe Biden, and look, I'm no huge fan of Joe Biden. I know, right, I'm certainly not of the opinion that the Democratic Party in the United States is always in the right. And frankly, many times when it's been in the wrong in our recent history, Joe Biden has been in the wrong, right? And without going into that history, I will say that Joe Biden was, in a sense, trying to use his deceased son, Beau Biden, to score a point in a debate, to call attention to the fact that Donald Trump had belittled American troops, apparently. We don't have it on record, but there are multiple reports that he called them fools, etc. And that as he did so, Joe Biden referred to his son, who in fact is an honored combat veteran and who had died a few years ago of brain cancer, tragically and young. And Donald Trump immediately and without any hesitation tried to pull the debate back to Hunter Biden, right? Joe Biden's other son, a man who has struggled with drug addiction. And it was just so mean-spirited, so crass, so utterly lacking in empathy, and so revealing of a level of aggression and indifference that I think, in a sense, if you look at these debates in part as a way to get insight into the character of the people who want to lead us, that moment may have been perhaps the most damaging to Donald Trump. And what's interesting to see is that the instant polls and then the polls that followed on that, um, and so this is an instant poll that shows, right, that basically, depending upon the poll, 60% to 30%, 2 to 1, or 47% to 40, 51 to 40, a substantial margin of people believe that Joe Biden won that debate immediately after the debate. And that I am not going to be able to go through all the details because I didn't have time to upload all the polls. The subsequent polls have shown this as well. This is one poll that is a little bit more nuanced. It only interviewed people who they were able to interview before and after the debate, and so to see the movement in people produced by the debate. And what we find is that Donald Trump's unfavorability rating rose, his favorability rating shrunk, though very marginally, right? And I think, in a sense, right now, on the one hand, there are very few people who are not mind made up about Trump, and on the other hand, what Trump needs, given the data I shared with you at the beginning of the lecture, is a fundamental shift in the dynamic in this election. And certainly he didn't get that out of this debate, right? Whereas Biden got a marginal improvement in his favorability rating and a marginal decline in his unfavorability rating. And I think the main thing to say is that Biden withstood what was a relentless and brutal effort to bully him, to throw him off his game, to interrupt him, which showed absolutely no respect for not only the rules that the candidates had agreed to in advance of the debate, but to the basic norms of civility and decorum, right? You wait for a pause when somebody is speaking before you interject. You don't talk over them again and again and again, let alone talk over them about their troubled son when the person is talking about the son they recently lost. And so, in this sense, Biden succeeded in what he needed to do. I don't think it was a great performance. I think there were tremendous opportunities for Biden to essentially turn to the camera and say, you can see next to me what the strategic acumen of the man who is currently president of the United States is. If this is the way he's going to approach this debate, how is he going to approach his advisors who are trying to share inconvenient truths with him about the virus? How is he going to approach the enemies of the United States, whether that would be Putin in Russia or Kim in North Korea? He doesn't have what it takes, and he's revealing himself not to have what it takes in the context of this debate. When it comes to policy issues, clearly, again, right, Trump suffered as a result of what he did in the debate, which was really to not focus on the policy strengths he might have had. And in fact, I think there are some policy strengths, for instance, with economics, as long as you don't look at issues of the distribution of income and wealth. Whereas, right, so when we look at performance, when we look at policies, again, Biden comes out doing much better than Trump, and that's the opposite from what Trump needed to produce. And then, when we look at the ultimate impact on this, it looks like Trump further damaged his chances, which were already slender, Biden's chances improved marginally as a result. And I do think this is important, which is to say that many people have said in polls, and it's a peculiar discrepancy, that they will vote for Joe Biden, but that despite what the polls say, they still believe that Donald Trump will win. And of course, this does have something to do with the fact that Donald Trump has a long history of defying expectations that he is washed up, going to go down, is finally exposed and defeated. But after the debate, it actually turns out that more people think Biden will win than Trump. And so that may be a significant perceptual shift in the politics of the United States. Okay, and then we can move forward a couple days, right? And so on Wednesday and Thursday, the president campaigned and did fundraisers, and early Friday morning, right, not very long ago at all, less than 48 hours ago at this point, he took to Twitter to announce that he had had a positive test for the coronavirus. I did listen to the press conference at Walter Reed Medical Center this morning. And one of the things that it revealed, and I haven't been up to speed on the press since then, but if I've got it right, the doctor there indicated that President Trump had already been symptomatic Thursday afternoon, and in fact got a test on Thursday afternoon, but did not get the results until Friday night. And we will have to see whether it becomes an issue that Trump was symptomatic and nevertheless went to a fundraiser in New Jersey where he interacted with a large number of people, again, in close quarters without wearing a mask. But what I want to call your attention to is that Donald Trump has been trying to convince us, really since the beginning of the pandemic, that the pandemic would not be bad, that it would go away, that it was more important to protect the economy, and that medicine would handle the virus, that people like him who are healthy and robust don't need to take precautions. He tried repeatedly to direct our attention away from the virus, especially once the campaign was underway. And he did so by playing the theme of law and order, by nominating a new Supreme Court justice, by embodying a cavalier attitude, right? And now he has the virus. And I mean it when I say I don't want him to succumb to the virus. I don't want him to suffer. And having said that, I will tell you that, frankly, I think it might be edifying for the country as a whole if he does not have a mild case of the virus. And I hope you won't take that in a mean-spirited way. I don't mean it in a mean-spirited way. I don't want him to suffer. But I also do want us as a country to learn that we have to take this virus seriously in order to be able to get it under control, in order to then be able to get our economy back on track, to get our kids back in schools, to get some semblance of normality back to our lives. I don't talk with you about it. It's personal, but I sorely miss being able to come out to California. And that's in part about getting to see you guys, but frankly, it's really about getting to spend time with my mother and my father and my aunts and uncles who are on in years and who I may not have much more time with. And as long as the virus is here, I can't do that. And of course, that's just one small example of the millions of ways in which millions of people are not just having their livelihood endangered, but who are having their lives upended by this virus. And we need to take it seriously. And perhaps Donald Trump's contracting the virus may serve as a lesson to us all about what happens when you don't take it seriously. Returning now to the political analysis, I will point out to you the obvious, which is that the vast majority of Americans disapprove of the president's handling. It's striking, stunning, perplexing, to say the least, that 40% of Americans still approve of his handling of the virus. But again, you will not win an election with 40% of the people voting for you. That's even the case given the peculiarity of the way in which the Electoral College amplifies the votes of the less populous areas in this country. And so the fact that Donald Trump has contracted the virus squarely draws attention back to the fact that we are in the grips of a pandemic and that we need to take it seriously. And that's good for public health. It's also a political fact, right? And it's going to make it very difficult for Donald Trump to change the dynamic of this election. And so I'll just show you a little bit more data on this. There is obviously a partisan split on this with, believe it or not, 80+% of Republicans approving of the way in which Donald Trump has managed the virus, which means, by the way, that 18% of Republicans disapprove. And those are the people, by the way, that are peeling off from Trump. And we can talk about them. They're older white voters, they're white suburban voters who voted for Trump, who are Republicans who nevertheless appear to be considering not voting for Trump or even voting for Biden. Obviously, very few Democrats approve of the way that Trump has handled the virus. And please note that roughly 2/3 of independents disapprove of the way that Trump has handled the virus. Again, electorally, the fact that he's not able to campaign, the fact that he may not be able to participate in debates, the fact that his reckless approach to campaigning, to governing, has now come back to bite him in the most direct way. All of this creates a dynamic that does not favor the president going into the home stretch of the election. It may, we will have to wait and see, imperil the nomination or confirmation, I should say, of Judge Amy Comey Barrett. Sorry. Now, the title I offered for this lecture was The Collapse of the Myth of Donald Trump, and perhaps the revelation of the hollowness of a certain kind of masculinity, which tends to be a distinctly American masculinity. And I just want to say a little bit more about this, right? Donald Trump embodies a certain kind of masculinity, right? He is a sexual aggressor. He is an aggressor overall, right? But he brags about sexual aggression. He disrespects experts. He shoots from the hip. He relies on his gut. He has been absolutely instrumental in his approach to business and politics. Don't think for a second that Donald Trump has a judicial philosophy that Judge Barrett conforms to, and that this is a principled decision. This is a chess piece for Donald Trump in the battle to regain the presidency. And by the way, Donald Trump is desperate to hold the presidency because, as we now know, he is hundreds of millions of dollars in debt, and he appears to be relying on the fact that he will maintain the presidency to prevent those debts from coming due and to allow him to generate the revenue he needs to pay them down when he's no longer president. He is under investigation for tax fraud. We now know, and we now know a fair bit about why he's under investigation for tax fraud. We haven't even talked about the various maneuvers that his tax records reveal, paying his daughter hundreds of thousands of dollars as a consultant at the same time he's paying her as an employee, writing down expenses on the family country retreat as if it were a business holding, et cetera, and so on, right? That there is real danger to the president in not winning re-election, but at the same time, he is increasingly naked. And what I desperately hope for America, again, is that we learn from the apparent collapse of Donald Trump and let me be absolutely clear. Obviously, my first hope is that the collapse is real and complete this time. But in addition to that, my hope is also that we learn not just about public health, not just about the importance of not being reckless, cavalier, risky in our behavior, that we've got to do what doctors and experts tell us to do, that we've got to do it despite the fact that it may look wimpy to wear a mask. Remember, the president belittled Joe Biden for how often he wears a mask, for the size of his mask, for the distance he maintains from other people, for doing what his own public health officials tell him everyone in the country should be doing, right? That's for him something that is risible, ridiculous, and frankly, effeminate, right? And so to circle back to masculinity now, right? We had another president who started out in entertainment and who started out in entertainment playing the part of a cowboy and governed in certain ways as if he were a cowboy. We then had two Texans, both of them named Bush, who brought a certain kind of swagger with them. And frankly, I think it inflected American foreign policy. And we now have a man who has played a highly successful mogul on TV and someone who is cutthroat in his aggression and completely reliant on his gut. And I'm thinking back here, and again, I'm sorry I did not get the slide up to show you the book, but there's this old book by Frederick Jackson Turner. I don't know if anybody remembers it. It's the kind of book that was often taught in college 30 or 40 years ago. It's called The Significance of the Frontier in American History. And what Jackson Turner argues is that it's not the actual experience of the frontier, but it is the myth of the frontier, of a place where there was no law and order, where one's ability to survive depended upon how fast one was with one's six guns or how tough one was with one's fists, right? And that in a certain sense, this myth has been deeply woven into the fabric of American society and is primarily sustained in a certain understanding of masculinity, which is an understanding in which being masculine means being tough. And being tough means relying on oneself and treating others as adversaries and not worrying about book learning or knowledge or expertise, right? And so one of the things that stuck with me for a long time, when you asked Republicans, especially the so-called less well-educated Republicans, what they didn't like about Barack Obama, many of them said they didn't like his walk, that he had an effete, elite walk, right? That he walked like a male model. He didn't walk like an American man. And I think some of that was coded racism, but I think some of that also pointed to other aspects of Barack Obama that in a sense were not fully conforming to the model of American masculinity. I'm thinking of another event in Obama's presidency when Obama refused to bomb Syria after Syria used chemical weapons against its own people. I'm deeply ambivalent about that decision. But one of the things that Obama says when he's interviewed about this is that there was a playbook, and the playbook said that you had to maintain the credibility of the country. If you had said you can't do this or else we will punish you, you had to punish, right? Or else your credibility would be diminished. And Obama said, look, if I bomb the plants and facilities in Syria, I may unleash gas that will kill civilians. I may escalate this war. I may hit the wrong targets. If Russia presents me with a way out, if you remember the details of this case, Russia actually negotiated to have the chemical production facilities dismantled, then I'm going to take that. And I'm not going to be so invested in my image that I'm going to do something as a policy that I may later regret. And that speaks to a different model of masculinity. And I just wonder whether, at least for younger people, at least for many people in our society who have not already had their sexual identity cast in the mold of American masculinity, whether it's possible that what we saw for Donald Trump this week, what I think is really the complete collapse of a myth. And it will take a while for us to reckon with this and come fully to grips with it. That this may teach us about different ways of being strong, of being courageous, of being independent, that don't perhaps have the destructive consequences that I think not just Donald Trump has had for our society, but an ideal of masculinity deeply rooted in American culture may have had for us for quite a while. All right, I will stop there. I had this idea, I wanted to share it with you. I'm curious to hear what you think. Who has comments or questions about either the 4 acts of the last week or the analysis I've suggested?
Yeah.
Are you concerned, Flossie? Go ahead.
Okay. He's pulled so many tricks on us that if he recovers to some extent, and he may now profess a new belief in a real God and repent for his sins. And most of us will say, oh yeah, but there is a group, maybe among the evangelicals, who will forgive him and may weep for him. Maybe not enough for him to win, but for him to spin a little bit. And I'm thinking that is not beyond him. He has no conscience. And if there's a real God, he never knew him. That's my fear. I also fear that Biden may suffer the consequences.
May in fact have been exposed by Trump, right? If my chronology is correct, Trump probably had the virus on Tuesday when he was debating.
It out.
Yeah, and look, let's be careful. This is all speculative. We don't know enough about how the virus operates, how it physically attacks us, to be absolutely confident about this. Yeah. Let me just, Flossie, as long as we're spinning scenarios, spin the scenario in which Trump says, in which Trump has a very mild case. And of course, he's getting the very best medical treatment, including experimental medical treatment available to anyone in the world, right? And so the likelihood that he's going to recover and maybe even have only a mild case is very high. And then, the other thing that he says is, not that I found God, but see, I told you it wasn't that bad. If you're healthy, it's not a bad thing. It's okay. Now, we'll have to see. You saw the little Twitter post he had last night. I think his face was ashen. I think his voice was scared.
Yes.
And so people who read those kinds of things, I wonder whether they will perhaps discount the bluster that might follow a rapid recovery. But I do think there are ways in which he could say, look at how robust I am. I've conquered the virus. I'm the leader you need. By the way, Joe Biden hasn't even had it. And so who knows if he would be all right, or if you might, lose your leader if you didn't have somebody as strong and healthy as me. There are ways that Trump can spin this to his advantage. I'm just not sure that enough of the American public are willing to go along with him at this point, assuming it is a mild case. If it's not a mild case, I think it's going to be much more difficult for him to see this as advantageous. The only advantage for him then will be increased sympathy. Suzanne Jonas, you had your hand up a moment ago. Is that right?
Yes, she did.
I'm going to try. Okay, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm wondering why you said that this whole series of events could impact the Barrett hearing. I don't see it.
Could impact the hearings on Barrett. Okay, I got it. Thank you. Two of the Republican members of the Senate Judiciary Committee contracted the virus, right? Two that we know of. And we don't know how bad their cases will be, whether they will be able to play their role on that committee. Judge Barrett herself was likely exposed. And again, we don't know enough about the virus. It appears that she has had it and recovered, not from last Saturday, but earlier than that. But we don't know enough about the virus to know for sure that she isn't perhaps still carrying it as a result of being the center of attention on Saturday evening in the Rose Garden and the White House, right? And so do we have in-person hearings? Do we have a full committee? And I think, again, the fact that the Republican Party is rushing this confirmation hearing is indicative of the strength of Donald Trump's grip on the party and the desperation that the party is feeling. And if it increasingly appears to be the case that there's no way that Trump can win, and that Republican senators in hotly contested races may be punished for ramming through a Supreme Court appointment, there may be some rethinking on the part of certain Republicans about supporting this. And note, right, that all it takes is another couple of Republicans to peel off, not necessarily from the Judiciary Committee, but from the caucus as a whole. And it's entirely possible that then the nomination will fall apart. Now, I'm not saying that it will. If I were to take a bet, I would say probably it will go through. And that's because, frankly, as a minoritarian party, as a party that only gets a minority of the vote, but nevertheless, the way in which the Constitution magnifies their power, a party that currently has a great deal of power, they're likely to use that power to solidify their hold on another branch of the federal government. That would be my prediction. But I do think that a week ago, I was saying to you, there's very little likelihood that this isn't going to go through. And I do think that the likelihood that it's not going to go through has increased dramatically in the last week. Still not to the point where it's more likely than not. I'm going to go next to, it's not actually Wilma, but you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, this is Steve Rader.
Hi, Steve.
Hi.
Speak
You
up.
know, Trump already is a labile person. He shoots from the hip. He acts out his anger. He's mean. With this, it's fine. People are finding out now there is a post syndrome where people become very labile, angry easily, and make quick decisions.
Yeah.
He is the top person that makes the decision about nuclear weapons. That scares me.
Yeah.
He could decide that he wants to drop something on North Korea or anywhere, and there's nobody above him that could stop him.
Yeah.
That's very concerning.
Yeah. And so I don't know if we say labile, we say mercurial, we say unpredictable, right? What the right word is. And by the way, he already had a very short attention span, right? And you know, and not only that, one of the things to be concerned about is we don't know how widespread this is among the rest of his staff, right? And so one of the things reporters will tell you when they enter the White House, they're wearing masks, but nobody else in the White House is wearing a mask. That in a sense, the staff of the White House has complied with Trump's example of being cavalier, of bucking the recommendations. And so they're all working close together, and clearly significant, well, some people very close to Trump have already contracted the virus. We don't know which vector of transmission it went and how widespread it'll be. But yes, that could further incapacitate the decision-making structure at the top of the executive branch of the federal government. And there are procedures in place for managing this. And I think, frankly, have to hope that Mike Pence is healthy and that he is able to step in as necessary. And I guess we also have to hope in the scenario that you're describing, which I think is the worst case scenario, that the American military is unwilling to do the bidding of a diminished, unpredictable, reckless chief executive commander-in-chief if it comes to that. But yes, there are real risks here. John Campbell, go ahead.
Thanks. I was going to say the same thing. I'm pretty sure the deep state in the Pentagon would nip any adventuresome military thing right before the election in the bud.
Thank God for the deep state, right?
Illegal though it may be. I was just going to think, I'm not sure why it wouldn't be an attractive notion for McConnell to say, you know, with all this confusion, it's really hard to get orderly hearings underway and all, but so let's punt this to the lame duck.
Oh, well, I think it's already likely to be punted to the lame duck. I mean, clearly Trump wants it now because he thinks it enhances his reelection chances, right? I should be cautious. I should be more cautious than I have been, which is to say, I'm saying there's a dynamic in this election. The dynamic favors and doesn't favor Trump. And so if that dynamic continues, then it's very unlikely that Trump will win. But, you know, how many October surprises can we get? Right, you know, we got a handful of them last week. So could something else fundamentally alter the dynamic of this election? In which case, does Trump become more viable? In which case, does McConnell decide that it's worthwhile accelerating the confirmation process or maintaining the current calendar for the confirmation process in order to try to assist Trump? Right, and you know, I'm sorry, but I do think that's the kind of machinations that are going on at this point. So yes, I think if the dynamic continues the way it is, it might be in fact exactly right that McConnell will take the excuse and not have the hearings now. I can't tell, but it looked to me like Susan Levy, you might be trying to say something. Is that right?
Two things. First of all, it's very hard to know if we're being told the truth from the White House. And second of all, who does Trump owe money to?
Okay, and you may have noticed in the press conference today, there was odd moments in which Trump's doctor refused to say whether he had ever had oxygen, right? Only that he hadn't had it since he's been transferred to Walter Reed. And so, yeah, there were things that set off little alarm bells in my mind. But I don't think that the military doctors at Walter Reed Hospital are going to systematically deceive the American people, right? That they are not part of a partisan branch of the government. And so I'm inclined to trust the basic factual information we're getting here. Susan, who he owes money to. He owes money to banks to the tune of $300 million, some of which he has personally secured, some of which he's secured using his only profitable properties. And he's in a dispute with the IRS, which if it doesn't go his way, he would owe another $100 million in back taxes, fines, and interest. And so the total is slightly in excess of $400 million. And that appears that it may may exhaust a large share of his resources to pay that off. And so that he would actually end up a lot less wealthy. Nina, were you trying to ask a question?
No.
No. John, I'm going to give you the final comment.
Thank you. It does appear that Trump is cognizant of the fact that Vladimir Putin is the richest man in the world.
Yes. and that Deutsche Bank, et cetera, are unlikely to try to collect on their debts if the person they're trying to collect against is the sitting president of the United States. Right. All right, everyone. Nobody wanted to talk with me about American masculinity. That's fine. I'll try to work that idea out a little bit better and get back to you on it. I hope you all continue to be safe and smart. I'm pretty confident that you will. I hope that you get some better air quality pretty soon. If you're not already, maybe the temperature comes down and the fires get under control. It is wonderful as always getting to see you. Take care. See you next week. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.